Hello, everyone. Nice to see you at this session. Carola Hein couldn't come, so that's why she asked Paolo De Martino and I to moderate this session. And I will begin in short, making an abstract of the text, which you know what this session is about. So it's about the port city territories, about the key locations in the post-oil transition, and also about the territories which have a special attention from the planners. Port city territories are also industrial and often petroleum hubs with important negative externalities for neighboring urban and rural spaces. So that's why this session argues that planning post-oil port city territories, due to their complexity, of course, can be paradigmatic also for sustainability transitions in other territories or areas of activity. And the session also argues that for an integrated consideration of spatial forms, such as port, water, road and rail infrastructure, urban areas, social structures, and so on, that all this is included in our topic. The session also further posits that planning the post-oil transition requires an evolutionary approach and also requires collaboration among diverse stakeholders and the creation of shared values as a foundation for planning. So we will see how the sustainability transitions happens in the past, in the present, in the future, in the port city territories, in different areas. We will also look at transdisciplinary and multiscalar approaches in viewing of planning the future of ports, of cities and their territories, and connecting all those futures with spatial, institutional, social, economic, and cultural perspectives. Perhaps the main thing is that the historical resilience of the port city territories is embedded in a maritime mindset or port city culture, which is a very strong and dedicated collaboration among diverse groups of public and private actors from different backgrounds around values that are shared. So it's therefore important to assess, find, and reinforce these shared values in light of the changes of today. Usually, the economic effects of port city collaborations are studied or have been studied, but the research of social spatial impacts and the integration of port and city territories and the role of planning is still missing. We are still missing this part of the studies. So today, many ports are carefully assessing stakeholder involvement in the port to address challenges to climate change. However, such transitions involve frictions and solutions towards resolving them are not yet clearly emerging. So port city territories need to find new ways to connect stakeholders in negotiations that are based on values. And I think we will deal with all those topics that I listed from the abstract Carola Hein prepared previously. We have 4 speakers today. I would like to ask you to ask questions at the end of the 4 sessions when we'll see how much time we have. The first presentation is from Karolina Krosnicka, who is an associated professor at Department of Urban Design and Regional Planning, Faculty of Architecture, Gdańsk University of Technology in Poland. She was employed for many years at the Department of Transport and Logistics at the Faculty of Navigation of Gdynia Maritime University in Poland, where she was mostly involved in issues connected with seaports and port terminus planning. Currently, her research interests concentrate on the theory of urban dynamics, especially at the port-city interface, planning and operating of seaports terminals, as well as development of waterfront areas, maritime sea planning, and integrated coastal zone management within urbanized areas. So the contribution is called Planning for Continuity and Effective Use of Space on the Border Between a Port and the City. So dear Karolina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucija. Can I share my presentation in the moment?
Sure.
I hope so. Okay. So the question is, can you see it already?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Great, perfect. Thanks once again for introducing me. My name is Karolina Krosnicka, yes, and the subject I would like to speak about is how to use actually more effectively the area on the border between the port and the city. And of course, it is very much correlated with the subject of the conference in general. If you look at this diagram, you will easily notice that the consumption of the different types of energy is growing within last years. Actually, it is growing along with the growth of number of people. However, as you see, per capita, it's not growing exponentially, or it's not growing all the time in the same way. It's due to urbanization, which is causing that we are more grouped together in places. So actually, if you combine this previous graph with the second one, connected with the land use and how the land use was changing, we know that we are somewhere in this area where the urban areas are taking more and more space, as more and more of us is living in the cities. But the cities, it is not only the place where the housing is. If you think about the whole city structure, you will find out that, of course, there is plenty of housing areas, plenty of the spaces where the services are dominating. We have to deal with urban sprawl, but we have also some other potential which we can use. And these areas are connected with industry, and in our case, in case of port cities, which are actually almost 60% of cities, it's city metropolises on the coast. So in this case, if you combine the port area to the city area, it will appear that that's a kind of important percentage. In case, for example, of Gdańsk, it's about 12% of the whole land the whole commune has. Rotterdam, it's over 20%, and in Antwerp, for example, this percentage is even higher. It's above 50%, but here it's a little bit tricky in that sense that part of the port is even behind the borders of the commune itself. But it's becoming to be more a tendency at the moment that it's not the only one city where the port somehow jumped from one commune to the others. It's also, for example, the case of Gdynia, where we bother in Poland with the same situation. So anyway, with this quite large percentage of land occupied by the port functions, it is really worth to consider how to use this land, especially on the border between the city functions and the port functions and industrial functions, because there is still quite a lot of potential to be used by us. And of course, we can also think about increasing the effectiveness of the use of the port. Here, for example, that's the picture of Port of Gdynia, where the transformation was going on. It's a kind of symbolic picture in a way, showing how it is changing from coal into more, into other cargoes simply. So the open spaces devoted to the coal storage are changed at the moment. So you see how the building is rising, which is going to be, which is actually now, because it's finished, used for storage of completely different cargo. So it's for some grains and so on. But even the concept of using this space is different. So it's high building, it's covered, and it's simply more intensively using the land. So the terminals are changing. Perhaps the easiest way for changing, for change and for more effective use of space is connected with container terminals. As you can see here, that's also a case of Gdynia, Poland, where this container terminal was growing in heights with the number of stacks and with a number of layers in each stack. Actually, from the first design of the terminal, it grows in that way that actually it was 3 times as many containers as it was in the first phase. So of course we need to think about let's say planning the terminals in as effective in terms of the use of space way as it is possible, but this is somehow going on due to increasing and improvements in technology. What is more, let's say, our challenge in terms of urban planners, it's these spaces which I marked here around the terminal. So there is quite a lot of space which is either wasteland, either not used effectively because they are treated sometimes as a kind of protection zone of the inhabited areas, not to allow inhabitants to live in too noisy environment, for example, and so on. But there are lots of possibilities how to involve these places and how to combine them, not without any harm for people living there and for their well-being. So all of us know that actually the port structure is kind of linear. So first line along the waterfront is mostly different types of terminals. Then we have the structure, which is a kind of closed hinterland where lots of logistics is still going on. And then we have the third line, which is more the lighter yellow combined with the city. So the biggest potential, as far as I noticed, at least in my research, is that second zone where we still have lots of port-related activities, but there is quite a lot of space still for let's say, merging these functions with city functions. And it's even more visible if you look at the picture at the right side, as ports are evolving, and it's very often at the moment that you don't have only one port, but it's a couple of ports, and between them, there is very often some extensively used space. Sometimes it's used for some purposes, but it's very often that this space is simply left unused. So this is also another potential which might be used here. And what is also important is that actually these borders between the port and city, they can have different character. So it may be very sharp, just a line being a wall or a fence, but it's very often when they are porous. And Carola Hein was an editor of one of the numbers in urban planning, which was actually porosity of these areas was the basic subject. So it's quite a lot of information there. But what is important that if this space or if the border between the port and city is more porous, then this, let's say, border space become more a surface, not a linear boundary, but more a surface-like. And if we consider this two types of boundaries, like linear and surface, how do they evolve? It's very often when we see that the linear border either extend due to that, for example, port moves away from the city due to some difficulties it produced for the inhabitants, for example. Sometimes the city moves away a little bit with the functions due to, for example, the busy road which is built there. So then it appears the situation when we have a kind of surface again, which is not a very convenient solution in terms of just using or being a useless in a way space, not properly used. But we have also the situation, which is actually the one we would like to aim to, when we squeeze the surface on the border and even merge these two spaces in that way that it's that's becoming one urban structure. And coming back to that picture, a lot of things has been changed from that 2010 picture. Here, for example, you can see that actually there is a space with the terminals and shipyard and so on. So that's the light blue one. But this yellow one, which is shown here, that's actually the space, the port city interface, which might be still used for intensifying of the functions, where the living quarters, which are here in brown, might have some activities in this area, and also it's also possible to have it vice versa, that port activities somehow also introduced into this area. And that's actually the same place, but a little bit further west. So you can see here that this area actually was taken by the port and changed into logistics mostly. And of course, it is connected with the development of the terminals. That's a kind of model with development of container terminals, where we can see that from somehow like mid of 20th century, the surface of the terminals itself increased significantly. Of course, the technologies changed. And as the space was needed bigger and bigger, then coming back to this, that's obvious that this part was somehow taken by the port functions. But we also had some activities which were the opposite. So these strategies, pro-technological, where we introduce infrastructure, transport system, and also this pro-entrepreneurial strategy connected with development of investment sites and logistics. That's quite, let's say, understandable and easy how to make it from the port point of view. That's a question of governance. But I think what we still need to elaborate much more, and we are trying to do, is that approach from the city point of view, where we try to introduce some pro-environmental strategies, to implement some greenery or even water, and also the pro-social, and maybe the most important pro-social activities connected with the public services, recreational areas, which I introduced to that land. So here, that's one of the last pictures where you can see that these activities are going on in some places, and all these strategies are used at the same time, of course, but it's also important, and that will be perhaps one of the next presentations. It needs a careful governance where we meet somewhere on the border between the governance of the city authorities and the port authorities. And that's the end, which is showing exactly the same space under the infrastructural bridge, driving exactly to the entrance of the container terminal, showing that the city actually is now working quite intensively on finding some solutions which allows us to increase this effectiveness of the land, even in that places where we wouldn't suppose there is any potential before. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer the questions at the end of the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Karolina, for your presentation. So if anyone has questions, please write them down, don't forget them. We will have a discussion at the end. So the next presenter is Paolo De Martino. Paolo is a researcher at the Delft University of Technology. He moved to the Netherlands in 2015, when he started as a PhD candidate at the Department of Architecture of TU Delft under the supervision of Professor Carola Hein. He received his PhD diploma in May 2021 within a dual PhD program between the Department of Architecture of Delft University of Technology and the University of Naples Federico II. His research interest, which touches upon the complex relationship between port cities and regions, deals with port cities from a spatial and institutional perspective. He has investigated the port city of Naples in comparison to port city territories along the Hamburg-Le Havre range, with particular reference to the cities of Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Le Havre. Since August 2021, he has a temporary teaching position at the Department of Architecture in Delft. So what we will hear is, you already have the title here, Reimagining Port Cities Beyond All, Visions from the Future. Paolo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucija, for the nice introduction. Do you hear me properly, and do you see the slides properly? Okay. So hello everyone again, and as Lucija already made an introduction, so my main research interest is in port cities, understood as main spatial, cultural, and institutional and infrastructure entities. So I'm not so much interested in the port infrastructure itself, and I mean in the spaces of the infrastructure, rather on the interrelation between ports, so the infrastructure and spaces of the cities. The special patterns, institutions, and most importantly, the cultural implication that ports have on cities and life of people. So my PhD investigated indeed how governance influenced space and culture in the port of Naples, southern Italy, which is also where I come from. But today I will talk about different layer of this port-city relation, which has to do with petroleum. And specifically, we will go through some couple of projects of students developed. So, and we run the design studio in Delft between 2017 and 2018. So to mostly discuss how education can play a role into this transition. So we will start from main question. So the urgency of moving beyond oil. Why do we need the transition? So I will talk about the concept of scenario as a tool to better deal with contemporary spaces, contemporary cities, port city territories. And we will go through a couple of projects, develop some visions developed by students. And finally, we will draw some conclusions. Well, you should know by now that oil is everywhere. It surrounds us, and it's, I would say, thanks to oil, ports, refineries, oil storage, that today we are able to make our cities functioning and move without our polluting cars all around the globe, travels, meet friends, and this thanks to oil that we can buy everything we need, like clothes, cell phones, computers. So even food, I would say, contain oil if we think about the logistic chain that allow us to have bananas on our tables. So in other words, oil is everywhere. And it's what Professor Carola Hein has described in several publications as this global petroleum scale, as I would say powerful concept, theoretical concept from a design perspective to explain the complex relation that exists between the many different layers that are related to oil. So when we think about petroleum, we most of the time think about the infrastructure, of course, the industry, the polluting part, the heavy industry, the architecture of oil, like, for example, gas stations. But it's also about culture and lifestyle. So our culture is embedded, is indeed molded around petroleum. So if we have to think about scenario without oil, well, of course, it requires thinking not only technical solutions. So that's also our main argument, which probably will be necessary. I mean, we will need technology to move further, but above all, it's about questioning our life, our habits, and our cultural beliefs. So why then port cities are central into all this discussion? Well, it goes without saying, and Lucija already made it clear also in the introduction, that when we think about port cities, most of the time we think about pollutions. We have the ports, ships, containers, you know, all the heavy part, and it's where I would say the global economy takes place. So if changes need to happen, it's probably there, and it's already, I would say, happening with all the discussion we are having on the energy transition, although it's still not enough. So port cities are key players into this, and we will use two cities as background to the story. Well, at least the two cities that have been investigated during the design studios. So the first one is Dunkirk, which has port cities on North Sea in France. And today there are two refineries that have been closed down, but still quite an industrial environment. And it was very fascinating because also with students, we went there and visited the refinery, the total refinery that was closed and today is used as industrial, activities related to industrial tourism. So people can go in and see how refinery works. So it was quite strong experience. And the second city is Naples, that today hosts fragments of refinery that has been closed down in the 1980s. But still functioning. So we have still quite a lot of oil storage, which are of course functioning and that are very close to the historic cities with all the environmental issues that this can relate to. So how will cities of the future work from an energy perspective? And of course, to answer, we cannot answer these questions and any other question related to oil using the traditional tools. So we are coming from a modern approach, so modernity. We are editing the zoning plan, which basically divided territories into enclave, into functional enclaves, and we see the result. And today we need to rebuild the relations between these fragments within the territory, and we need scenarios for that. So we need visions, And the idea of scenario has to do with different temporalities, different scales. It's not a drawing, but it's again, it's a vision, and we can also talk about this later on. So making the design is not only about dealing with isolated issues, rather it's about putting things in relation and understanding this relation between different elements within the territory and the impacts that each action can have on space was the central question for students within the design studio. And I have selected just 3 images to give an idea of how much provocative a design can be. So here is Dunkirk. Today, as I said, is facing the problem of reinventing the city in the era without oil, with 2 refineries closed down, and what to do with these territories in between at the edge of port and city, and how we can reinvent these territories. So these students that called the project Post-Industrial Safari proposed some huge machines that could, by cleaning up the soil, could also become a recreational activity for citizens. So this question, the relation between nature and energy, dealing with the issues of reclamation, which is a very central topic when it comes to beyond oil, you know, who is going to pay for that? This second project called the Cured Land starts from the idea of Dunkirk as industrial port cities. So for many years, the oil industry has provided jobs. That's why also people could live with that. But today this gives back to people a very deformed landscape. So to change this territory, it's important to question the temporal dimension. So how much time do you need to change a territory? Imagining how this landscape can also change over time, generating new economic mechanisms. And this final vision is about Naples, the studio we run in Naples, and this student proposed the concept of market. So this student get inspired from the city values, the idea of the market square, and it put that into an old oil storage where people can work and develop new harbor-related activities, and in this way also to connect to the outside. So according to this idea, traditional urban relations, the way of living in the city, historical materials like the stones, but also rituals, can become a source of inspiration to rethink the port-city relation in an era beyond oil. And it's about also what Karolina was saying about the porosity. This concept of porosity was originally applied to urban studies by the German philosopher and writer Walter Benjamin, who during his travels to Naples actually defined at the beginning of the century the Italian port city as a porous territory, referring to the materiality of the architecture like the stone, but also the unexpected voids and fractures within the city and the theatricality of lifestyle. So to conclude, we have to, what could be some take-home message here. So we have to reinvent our territories, reinvent what will be the leftovers when oil will run out. And this is a very key question that has been discussed, but there is no preparation for that. The question is apparently an urban question, but as we saw, this transition cannot only happen with technology. So technology will not save the planet. Students show, in fact, that this transition needs to be fun and also need to happen different scales and across many different layers and dimensions. So we do not have to start from scratch. This is also another important message. So we have the urban palimpsest, and we just need to reorient our focus and adapt our cities to new contemporary needs, contemporary spaces. Thank you very much. Lucija, you are muted.
Lucija, you have your mic.
I'm sorry. Paolo, thank you very much for this presentation. Again, please write down your questions or remarks so that we can have some discussion about those topics. And
now I will take over with presentation, with the introduction, because the next speaker is Lucija. Ažman Momirski is an associate professor of urban design at University of Ljubljana. Her research lies in the past, present, and future of spatial development of port city territories. She was the project leader of professional guidelines for the overall spatial organization of the Port of Koper, Slovenia from 2007-2011, and published research papers such as The Resilience of Port Cities of Trieste, Rijeka, and Koper in 2020, Shifts in Governance, Who Governs and What is Governed in Port of Koper, and finally, The Studying Defense, Land Use Patterns in around ports as hidden designers. So, Lucija, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, today I will speak about the industrial symbiosis and the port city territories, and how does maritime mindset, what kind of question can we pose considering maritime mindset? You, of course, know all what industrial symbiosis is. It's a part of the industrial ecosystem, which can function analogously to a biological ecosystem. And the industrial symbiosis is engaging industries which are usually separated in a collective approach, so that they are exchanging materials, energy, water, and byproducts. And so there are two key issues considering industrial symbiosis. One is collaboration between the companies and between the parties. And the other one is the geographic proximity of those companies, although some authors argue that geographic proximity is not a necessary condition for industrial symbiosis. Okay, why is this not shifting down? Okay. I don't know. Okay, now. So industrial symbiosis is also a part of the circular economy. So because it creates values for both companies and society, because it's reducing resource consumption and benefiting the economy, the climate, and the environment. We know two models of industrial symbiosis. The one is the self-organized industrial symbiosis model. The self-organized model is when companies spontaneously build trust and cooperation. And the second one is the planned industrial symbiosis model, so which usually are planned eco-industrial parks. So the paradigmatic example of the first model of industrial symbiosis is Kalundborg in Denmark. It's mainly known as a business model. It evolved as a series of bilateral connections over 30 years. There are not a lot of research on Kalundborg considering, for example, land use, because the development here spread actually in the countryside, so it's a greenfield development, but also considering the linkages to the mindsets in the area. So this is, the municipality actually is quite small. It's or the city is quite small. It only holds 16,500 inhabitants. Here you see the port. The plan, the current plan of the municipality of Kalundborg, which entered into the force in 2018, defines port, as you see, only as a very small area, and all the rest, which we look at it in an orthophoto, and we would say, well, this is the port as well, are actually industrial areas. So there are port, transport, logistic companies located there, supply system, all refineries, tanks, administration, warehousing, workshops, and so on. Here you see the development, and this development in Kalundborg, so in the industrial symbiosis, started between the Statoil refinery, which changed name later in 2018 to Equinor. And it's, this part is located relatively close to the port. And this is the process how it started. There were, of course, some negotiations between the companies in this industrial next to the port areas. And of course, they had to find a kind of condition that was economically acceptable from all the companies involved. But it was a spontaneous development, and it later evolved. So in 30 years, we have this kind of image. So more and more companies based on very well functioning of the industrial symbiosis already established joined that partnership. And we have this kind of functioning in the area now. Here you can see there is an exchange of energy, there is an exchange of water, and there is an exchange of the materials. However, well, we have also a lot of models of waste exchange. There is an internal, external, and so on. And there's very important are the web platforms and the information spread so that other companies can join. So industrial symbioses are always created by a process in partnerships. It takes time to create symbiosis, so you cannot make a symbiosis in 1 year or 2 years. You can start something, but as you've seen, it takes a longer period. And what is crucial, and this is also crucial for our port city territories, is that between the parties, there must be a mutual trust. So not only a lot of data that is supporting that, not a new knowledge, networks and so on, but a trust must exist, because otherwise this symbiosis doesn't work. A research which we have done in Slovenia on the waste generation showed that there are two problems with industrial symbiosis in industrial areas. The first one was when we were contacting companies, it was very difficult to open up a discussion on industrial symbiosis, because they, you know, that these are business secrets and most of the companies do not want to disclose that. And the second problem was actually that companies were unfamiliar of the concept of industrial symbiosis. They were unfamiliar what kind of win-win situations this presents to them. So there are a lot of obstacles for to the implementation of industrial symbiosis. There is a lack of exchange of information between actors. There's a lack of cooperation and trust between actors. And there is a lack of awareness among local communities. So, to have a success in the implementation of industrial symbiosis is not to consider industrial symbiosis as a business model, but to focus on the actors and stakeholders and their cooperation. And in this sense, the collective maritime thinking, which is very often in the port territories, like we all belong to the port and the port belongs to us, which is typically developed in port city territories, because people identify themselves very strongly with the port development and with port processes. So this kind of a collective maritime thinking could reduce all the above mentioned obstacles to industrial symbiosis implementation, at least in the port city territories. So crucial to develop industrial symbiosis in port city territories are these social and cultural connections between actors, different kinds of actors, citizens, stakeholders, workers, owners. These connections have an important influence on complex systems such as port city territories, and also on technological innovations such as industrial symbiosis. So there are popping up key questions for implementing industrial symbiosis in port city territories. First, to define the maritime mindset in the port city territories. That's crucial. How is it structured? Is maritime mindset something that refers to a particular employment or a particular social structure? Does it influence the actors in the industrial symbiosis business models? Does maritime mindset build cooperation between actors, increase their trust, enable better communication? Is maritime mindset a value that has evolved from the past into the future? How does this all influence planning issues? So with defining that, I think we are opening a lot of future research possibilities for better planning of port city territories. People who live at the sea in the port city territories, they are much more aware of the power of the sea because there's a very strong force of nature that, of course, mankind overcomes by ships traveling from one end of the world to the other. So this is in the port city territories, there's a kind of attitude which builds up already from the past, and it's exists in the present, and it will grow in the future for sure. So there is a form of maritime mindset which is different than in other territories. And as it builds trust, the maritime mindset could be of particular importance for accomplishing projects like industrial symbiosis in port city territories. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucija. Thank you very much. So we will conclude this section with last presentation by Justyna Bres. She's an academic teacher working at Gdansk University of Technology in the Department of Urban Design and Regional Planning. She's an urban planner with experience in spatial planning in Poland, and she specializes in spatial planning in maritime areas and within coastal zone. Currently, together with the multidisciplinary team of professionals, she works on one of the first marine spatial plans in Poland for seaports like Gdansk, Gdynia, and Hel. Her scientific interest and teaching concentrate currently on subject of spatial planning, land and marine area, as well as development of marine ports. Currently, she's working on her doctoral dissertation on subject of development of public space at the edge of water and land in the context of spatial planning on land and marine spatial planning in Polish port cities. So the floor is yours, and yeah, I can already see the presentation on the screen.
Thank you. So I understand that the presentation is already visible, right?
Sorry, what did you say?
Is the presentation visible already?
Yes,
Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Well, so welcome again from Poland.
Maybe you can,
as Paolo mentioned.
Full screen.
Yeah, of course. Right now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, well. So welcome. As Paolo mentioned, together with Karolina Krosnicka, I work at the Gdańsk University of Technology. And today's presentation is going to be a little part of my doctoral dissertation, which is devoted to urban blue spaces in small Polish port cities. And well, the problem that is visible in small port cities in Poland is the functional transition between from the previous fishing ports, small trade ports, towards the touristic ports and recreational ports. So with this change of function of the port itself, the public spaces and the functioning of the city changes also. And what also changed in the past decades in small Polish port cities is the administration of maritime ports, as well as the whole spatial planning system, which I will be talking about in a while. So the issue now in the small cities is how to develop post-port public spaces and the public spaces adjacent to the water and to the existing ports in the light of ongoing functional changes in ports, as well as the administrative and legal changes in order to enable the cities to grow sustainably and with cohesion between water and land, because many public spaces in those cities comprise the land area as well as the water area, which should be managed properly altogether. So the case study that I've chosen today is the small port city of Hel. It is more or less 3,000 inhabitants located in North Poland at Hel Peninsula, situated between the open waters of the Baltic Sea and the Gdańsk Bay. Well, actually, my research touches the issues of 18 Polish port cities located along the coast. However, due to the limited time, I will just try to show the main key findings for all of those small cities on one example. So basically, the key findings of the whole research so far, because I'm still continuing, is the finding out what are the main spatial problems in urban blue spaces in those cities. What are the main problems in coordination of spatial planning between water area and land area? And how to face the problem of lack of zoning plans in many areas in the cities, as well as the lack of efficient planning tool for the land and water altogether. So to begin with, what is my main focus and what is the urban blue space actually? So this is basically, let's say, in short, the space at the edge of water and land. But it's not like waterfront, which we all know perfectly, this concept. The waterfront is located on the land. However, the urban blue space consists of land as well as the adjacent water area. The example might be, for example, the beach with the recreational swimming area. So it's not only about the land, it's about considering the water and the land altogether. So during my research, I've recognized 12 types of such urban blue spaces based on their functional and spatial characteristic. And these are all listed down here. For example, it might be a water square. So the square adjacent to the water, which might be also partly flooded by the water from time to time. The example is, for example, is right here, the picture from the Praça de Comércio in Lisbon, which is one of the main public squares in the city. And it is partly flooded by the water with the tides. Another type of urban blue space is the water market. It can also be a water communication node, such as port basin or marina basin. The other type is, as I've mentioned, the swimming area with the beach, where the users have, usually they have free access from the water to the land, and the other way around. Another type is sport and recreational area, which might be, let's say, as well parked by the water as the floating gardens, for example. There is also a coastal greenery, waterfront boulevard, pier, waterway, bridge, and smaller spaces such as watercourse or water pathway. So I've already mentioned where I've conducted my research. These are 18 small Polish port cities located by the coast, by the open sea waters or the inland waters of the sea. And for today, I've chosen only one city, but let's say the closer look into the spatial planning provision was taken and chosen 6 cities. And I will try to explain it on the example of Hell today. Why the topic of spatial planning of these public spaces at the edge of water and land is so important, especially now in Poland. The answer is that the legal system has changed recently when it comes to planning of the coastal areas. And well, due to the directive of the European Union establishing the frames of maritime spatial planning, EU members are obliged to develop marine spatial plans up to the year 2021. So it's very much right now. Actually, in Poland, so far there has been only one general plan in force. It's just in force for a few months. The general plan for the whole marine waters in Poland. But under development are many smaller plans, the detailed plans for port areas and for the port city areas. So the important issue for the growth of port cities is to manage the development of this urban blue spaces, so the area at the edge of water and land, in a coherent way, so that the local zoning plans that already exists for many years on land will be coherent with the very new marine spatial plans that are currently developed in the water area. So my research approach was basically like presented here, and I took step by step. First, I recognized the characteristic of small port cities, then the character of the urban blue spaces. After that, I tried to recognize the main spatial problems within urban blue spaces in Polish port cities. And after that, according to those recognized spatial problems, I researched the provisions of already existing spatial plans on land and the ones on the water in order to compare them and find out if they are coherent, if the provisions come into the synergy or they are in a conflict with each other, which would, of course, make it impossible to develop the coastal public areas in sufficient way and in effective way. So I used the literature, the on-site visits, cartographic research, and many data, also including local documents. Here on the right side, you can see already the map of the city of Hell with marked urban blue spaces. For example, it is the first picture, the up one is the space of post-military port, which is located on the east side. It was a military port which is partly freed from this function, and now the plan is to develop it for the city purpose, for the touristic purpose. There, the other photo is the public beach in between two ports. And the last picture shows the main port of Hell, which used to be a fishing port. I mean, it is still a fishing port, but it is slowly changing its function into more touristic. So in the city that is the case study presented today, I've recognized 6 out of 12 described earlier urban blue spaces. Which is the port basin in the place of the existing port of Hell, the beach with the swimming area between two ports, plus waterfront greenery, waterfront boulevard, which stretches along the port and towards the beach. Also the piers are the part of the public space system, and smaller pathways by the water. Unfortunately, for the purpose of my research, I was able to use only one recognized urban blue space, which is due to the lack of the local zoning plans, which I've mentioned earlier. So in the city of Hell, there is currently the marine spatial plan being developed, marked here with these blue lines. However, in the coastal belt, there's only one local zoning plan that touches the water, and the rest is totally unplanned at the moment. So here in gray, there is this urban blue space of public beach marked, and it is partly covered by the land spatial plan marked in red, and partly by the marine spatial plan marked in blue. So before I moved on to analysis of spatial plans provisions, I tried to find out what are the current spatial problems in those urban blue spaces. And I took into consideration 6, let's say, main categories that characterize the quality of public space, which is the transport and communication, the integrity of particular public spaces and the integrity of water and land area, the functionality and safety of the spaces, the ecological quality, aesthetic quality, and the expression of local marine identity. So after running the analysis of the listing problems, I found out that 7 out of analyzed 21 features are, let's say, assessed negatively in the city of Hell, which is the access by the water transport. It's not sufficient in the city. The street furniture and public amenities, the flood protection also seems to be a problem in those spaces. The aesthetic quality, especially of the temporal seasonal elements, of them, the activities related to maritime and port economy is also quite poor, which means that the city, the public spaces in the city itself loses the unique marine and port identity. And also there is a lack of educational and cultural elements that relates to this unique port identity. That was in the case of Hell, but to speak about the whole research, the other cities, in general, the most problems occurred in the matter of water transportation and the connection between water transportation and land transportation. It seems to be a big problem in small and medium-sized cities, port cities in Poland. Also, the big problem is with the features connected with local maritime identity. It seems that the ports during the transition from the fishing ports and the trade ports towards the more touristic spots, they seem to lose the local identity, and they seem to be more or less all the same. And the third biggest problem is the connection between the water and land and the provision of the access for the users from the land to the water and otherwise. So that is the general conclusion for all of the cities. After recognition of those main aspects of problems, I analyzed existing spatial plans in let's say, in three aspects. First of all, the provisions according to water and land integrity, which means how let's say, the local zoning plan on land and the plan on water cope with joining those two bodies together. Is there any provision that assures the access from the water to land, or the, I don't know, the coastal protection, and so on? The second aspect was how the provisions of the plan deal with recognized spatial problems. Do they answer the problem of local identity? Do they answer the problem of transportation connection, for example, and so on? And the last aspect that I analyzed in this planning analysis is the other overall administrative and legal issues that occur, let's say, apart from the provision of the port itself, but the problems that may occur during the management, the process of development of the plan, the public discussions, and so on. So coming back to the case, just to illustrate the issue that I am dealing with, and how we have, as I've mentioned, one local zoning plan and currently developed marine plan. There are significant differences between those two because they have other legal framework. They are passed according to different legal bases in Poland. The local zoning plan is developed by local municipality, whereas the marine spatial plan is developed by different body, the Governmental Maritime Office. The boundaries of each plan also differ. So the local zoning plans usually their boundaries are along the geodesic lot boundaries, whereas in the marine area in Poland, we do not have those lot boundaries set. So usually the boundaries are set according to the geodesic points on the water or along the coastline. The scale of those plans also might be an obstacle when it comes to development of the area at the edge of those two, because in Poland.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Can you just speed up a bit, because we have 15 minutes left and we need some questions and discussion. Sorry.
Sure. No problem. I will just skip the details then and go to the main key findings. So when I compared the provision of the plan, of those two plans, actually no bigger conflicts appear in this case. However, in other cities, I noticed that there is a big problem between the function of port development and tourism, and also between tourism and natural protection. So these two functions seem to be the biggest problems to coordinate. And besides those problems of the provisions of the plan, the biggest administrative problem, let's say, is that no local spatial development plans are actually set in small Polish port cities in the area of the port and the coastal area, which makes it impossible to develop the urban public spaces at the edge because we have no plans. So everything is in chaos, and it just evokes the problems of between different parties that have different interests. It's sometimes impossible to find a solution. The other main problem is the management of different bodies, which I mentioned before. The municipality runs one plan on the land, and the other body of Maritime Spatial Office runs it on the water, which also makes it difficult to coordinate. The different scales that I've mentioned was also the problem, as well as the constant changes of the shoreline. As I've mentioned, the marine spatial plans, their boundaries are set according to the coastline, which changes constantly. The Maritime Office also updates the geodesic data, but that results in the confusion between the bodies and the provision. Sometimes the plans cover each other. Sometimes there is just like a small strip in between plans that is basically unplanned due to those changes and fluctuations of the coastline. So yes, these were the main conclusions. What are the plans? What are the main problems according to the spatial planning at the edge of water and land in small Polish port cities? In case you have any questions, I have to just rush through the last part of the presentation. I will be very happy to answer if you want to find out more. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and sorry again for
no, that's okay. We have limited time.
So we have 15 minutes. I would say it's quite okay to open for some questions. So, and yeah, we will be more than happy to answer them. In the meantime, yes, please.
Who wanted? Someone else wanted to speak? No. I have one question for Karolina, the last slide, which you have shown in your presentation, is how you have land use, a different land use on the floor, and then different land use in the lifted part. This is very similar to a spatial plan of the Port of Koper, where we proposed also this kind of a two-level entering this infrastructure into the port. But later, when elaborating the guidelines for the master plan of the Port of Koper, this was declined by the offices like Customs. Customs didn't agree with this kind of solution. So what is, do you expect, I mean, I understand this is an idea, but have you had already discussions with different kinds of, offices which give permission to such an intervention?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lucija, for this question. Of course, that's the concept, although quite intensively discussed, as well as some other, let's say, ideas connected with, as you and Paolo mentioned, changing the mindset. It's also changing the mindset about how to use this space. And that's true that we don't have so-called layer law in Poland. As far as I know, it's only in a couple of countries in the world until now. For example, in Austria, as far as I know, that they have it, that you can plan, you can have different plans for different layers of land. In Poland, it's not possible, but it's possible to allow some temporary uses in some places. So the land is somehow treated from above. And of course, for example, when you have the elevated road, for example, you can allow to have some temporary usage of this space, of course, underneath. So according to the master plan, you can allow it, but of course, then it's quite problematic to even realize such a proposals, because then it's a question who owns the land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's one problem. And the second problem is, as you mentioned, for example, the port authorities and some public services like customs. For example, that road I was showing you, they needed, we also were thinking about opening the wide view for the for the port. And the problem was that, okay, you can do it, but you need to put a fence along in case somebody is throwing things into the terminal, for example, exactly. or the opposite way. So these kind of things are really problematic. But still, I liked very much your presentation when you mentioned that, let's say, maritime people creates a kind of society, and they understand a lot of problems. When you start talking with them, they can find a way to solve that problem sometimes. So we also have quite a lot of experience that involving different bodies and different partners in the process sometimes very much help, maybe not to, well, have an ideal solution, but at least to find out some places where some solutions are possible, and it's a kind of common acceptance or consensus on some specific problems. But yes, you are indeed right that it's not so easy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
other questions? In the meantime, I was taking notes, so I hope this can help, and I also catch everything in the right way. But these are just in a form of notes to maybe to pick up on something. Any other questions?
I actually have a question to you, Paola, and Lucia also. It's not connected to the presentations, which were very inspiring for me, but I wonder if you know about any tool, the planning tool in your countries that connect planning at the water and land. Do you have any idea of that or not? Because as I've mentioned, in Poland, we are lacking such a planning tool, and I'm just wondering how is it in other European cities? Do you know?
Well, I tried to answer, and actually it's very much connected with your presentation, because with this, so in Italy we have the same issue of too many tools.
Yep.
And it's also one of the points I was writing down. So there is this conflict. I mean, our culture is very land oriented. So we also the zoning, also the plans you showed are very much land oriented. And when it comes to water, that's a very confusing topic, because you have a different way of governing the water. So the borders work differently and all this stuff. So actually the maritime special planning was introduced as a tool to bring all the sectorial, existing sectorial tools together in theory. But in practice, this is not really happening. I mean, at European level, we are very late in making these plans. And there are very few examples in Italy, I mean, Venice, and there are very few. And exactly. We don't even know which authority, well, there are the authorities that should be in charge of making these plans, but they are not working on it. So to answer your question, yes, the tool should be indeed the maritime special planning as an opportunity to bring the land and water together. But the question remains in terms of coordination of authorities, because again, when it comes to water, so the actors become even more, and some of them there are intangible, dynamics that you are not always able to control, and so the economy move in a very different way, and flows into the water are really going differently. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's mostly what we have in Italy actually.
Right. I think a couple of years Europe gave guidelines for all European countries to make a plan on the water side of the country.
Yes, exactly. That was the European Union directive, but I was just wondering if it's already in life in your countries, or
it is in Slovenia. I think it was accepted 2020 or 2021. I don't recall it, but it was. My colleagues worked hard on that plan, and it's accepted. Following the European guidelines. Before that, I have to say that we made some smaller studies, and we found out like were overlapping authorities on the water side, much more than on the land side, I would say. Although when we were preparing guidelines for the master plan of the Port of Koper, this was a joint area. So the land part and the water part, we worked on both. So this was not separated. So this was a unit, was a complete area where the ships come into the port. So where are the corridors where they come into the port? Where are the basins? Where are the piers? So that was considered as a whole. It was not separated.
Okay, but that was the study, right? The project, not
no,
the
that was the master plan. That was the master plan.
Master plan.
Yeah, that was the master plan. So the Port of Koper now is following that master plan, and so they are building according to that. Yeah.
Okay,
so both
thank you.
water part and the land part were considered together. So what kind of influences there are. If you do something in the water part, of course, that has an influence on the land part and vice versa.
I would have also a question to Lucia and Paolo, if I may.
Sure.
Because you talked about study cases. Paolo referred to Dunkirk and you to Kulundborg in Denmark. And I wonder if we are talking about post-oil and about actually, well, if we imagine that we don't need the refineries anymore in the port. Of course, I know that it's a kind of future scenario, but let's consider this like that. Do you think it is wise and even possible due to pollution, for example, of land, to involve these areas into the, let's say, structure of the city rather than to convert it into some investments connected with more, let's say, logistically or some industry-oriented areas which would fulfill maybe different roles. Because in case of Dunkirk, for example, that was quite obvious that this refinery is not existing anymore. And from time to time, we need to close some refinery anyway. So I was wondering, does it cause, let's say, this stage or this level of pollution, which somehow enables easily to somehow implement new functions, or it's quite clean, at least in general, if we consider the area of the, let's say, so-called tanks and park tanks, or the whole structure of the storage areas around the refinery. So what are your reflections on
that? Maybe I can start. Well, you touching a very key topic. I'm not quite sure I will have an answer on that. So so the first thing is the problem of reclamation, and we used I mean the approach in the past, since the industrial the first refineries were taking place in port areas, and the industry of oil. So new industries always reused existing lands to build, for example, a refinery was closing down, so let's build a new one. So, and this also the problem of ownership or responsibility in terms of pollution, because you are not really able to identify a name that is responsible for polluting that land. So it's a long process developed over century, areas that have been used for industries, and they will always develop that way. So the main issue is to trigger a process of reclamation when oil will run out, which is, I would say, something we have to start thinking about now. And well, Dunkirk is quite limited scale. Let's think about Rotterdam, where 70% of the port area is related to oil. So can you start from scratch, demolish everything and develop new parks? I don't think so. I mean, we can think about definitely new functions that are compatible with the dynamics of the city. I still think that this industry in the future, or in the next decades, this belongs to our culture. So that's also an argument of, I mean, this is heritage. This will be, and this is already heritage. So we should respect that somehow. But integrating the dynamic of the cities, that today it's not happening. So they are compartmentalized within the city, and it's something that just use the city, doesn't give back rather than for the energy, it doesn't give back values to people that, you know, they don't really understand why they have to live close to a refinery. I mean, they don't see a connection to their life. Probably they saw that in the past where people were working in the refineries, but this is, you know, this is changing completely. So to answer your question, I would, you know, treat these spaces as kind of heritage, something that should be, you know, soil should be cleaned up, architecture should be preserved and be reinvented with new functions, and we have to identify new values. So it's not just a park without anything, but probably should be reintegrated in the city differently. And in Dunkirk, it's happening, you know, they are using for educational activities. So the refinery is not working anymore as a refinery. I also asked the total if we can reuse the architecture to make new kind of energy, you know, to make it run with a different product. They said no, it's more convenient to demolish and build something new than recycle because this is working differently, you know, with oil and this stuff. I was quite sure of that, but this was the answer. So yeah, that's also more or less my answer. I don't know if I answered the question. Yeah, that's what I see.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks.
So I think it's 1 o'clock already. So considering the question about Kalundborg is, I think the refinery there, it's in a very different position because it's involved in the industrial symbiosis. And it actually has a positive effect in certain sense. So I think that there the answer is more complex because of industrial symbiosis. What I want to stress again is that Kalundborg is always taken as the first technological and business model ever. But planners, I think as planners, we should look at it also in different ways, like it's a greenfield development. You know, it's something we are trying to fight against. And also considering you know, further development, what will happen? So can it go inward or does it really need to go outward? It's a big question.
Yes, thank you, especially for the word inward, which is, I think, the key issue here in the port development. Thank you.
We have a question from Paul. So we are already running out of time, but if you have time, I would say to allow Paul to make the questions and react to them.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentations. I am coming from more of a global perspective and just wondering, as far as oil goes, port cities and transportation of goods is going to be much easier when we have less energy. I didn't really hear that perspective, like from the speakers, and I'm just wondering, talked about this European strategy. Is it something that we're talking about? Like, you know, that obviously a port city is going to be more effective than, you know, trucks or trains even for getting goods in and out.
In my perspective, that's quite questionable when this future is coming, because, for example, at least for trucks, the lobbies for trucks are very, very strong, so they fight very much against it. So.
Well, it's difficult to imagine that trains are disappearing. I think, especially that it's quite. Comparatively pro-ecologic way of transportation, I think. But actually what is missing I think in most of the ports at least in Europe, is the capacity of the train, of the railway, because it's already like 70% of, or even higher, of usage of the railway serving the ports. And there is more and more concepts of building the dry ports inlands. So actually it's just pushing the problem inlands, I would say, rather than solving it in the place. But that's also, in a way, the perspective of up-to-date situation. And if we consider, for example, that simply speaking, if we not consume so much, not in terms of energy, but in terms of our needs, then the transportation would go down because we don't need to transport so many goods from other places. So that's again more the question of changing the mindset, but not necessarily maritime, but let's say everybody mindsets all over the world. What about consuming everyday things which we use? So I think it's also referring to that question, not only energy, not only oil, but also what do we need for living?
Yes, I thank you, Paul, for the question. I completely agree with you, Karolina. That was also my kind of answers that I had in mind. So the ports, in the end, serve the market. So ships serve the market, and as long as we used to, buy things all over the globe, ports and ships and dynamics will respond to that. So probably the answers is more on our ability also to change our habits, our way of living, and and we saw this with COVID. I mean, we were forced to make some changes, and we also had some indirect effects on the environment. But this, I mean, that's also related to the question of circularity, but also how circularity then can be sustainable, because if we stop buy things from other places, would that be also completely sustainable? So it's really an open question, but the answer is more on the relation that we have with energy. So it's rather than just focus on the energy itself, it's more on the relation that this has on our life, actually. So the change can happen there.
Thank you.
Welcome. So if there are no other questions, maybe we can close the session. I can also share with you the notes. Maybe it can also become an opportunity to get in touch and maybe develop something further together. Okay, so thank you very much to all of you for the wonderful discussion, and let's meet again somewhere soon. Okay.